Good morning, everyone. I want to start today by thanking everyone who's shared their story. This is why I do my job, to change the lives of working people. The Prime Minister will show today how our plan for change will do just that, with an unrelenting focus on the issues that people really care about. And it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to Pinewood Studios, where so much magic has been made over the years. Fantastic films which showcase the best of British innovation, from Star Wars to Superman. Cleaning up the mess that we've inherited feels like a job for a superhero. But this isn't fiction or fantasy. It's down to a Labour government to do the job we have done throughout history. As Clement Attlee built the hundreds of thousands of homes for heroes from the rubble of the Second World War, Nye Bevan created a national health service helping everyone based on their needs and not their ability to pay. Barbara Castle and Harold Wilson secured equal pay with women unionising in the workplace. And Tony Blair and Gordon Brown tackled child poverty and rebuilt our public services from the ground up. Now this Labour government, under Keir's leadership, must achieve the growth and the better living standards that every part of the country needs and every person in the country desperately needs and deserves. And we're already rebuilding Britain in partnership with working people, focusing on their priorities. We know that fixing the failures of the past will be a massive challenge. But our mission-led approach to government is about tackling them head-on. We will get Britain back on its feet. We'll create the good jobs, new homes and strong communities that are the foundation of a good life. We know how missions can drive our country forward. We've seen it before when the last Labour government pledged to end child poverty within a generation. That commitment changed my life. I've seen firsthand and had first-hand experience of what a mission-led government can do. In the opportunities it creates, the communities it builds, and the trust that it forges between the government and the people it serves. I stand before you as Deputy Prime Minister thanks to the last mission-led Labour government, and I'm proud to be part of another serving you today. Change has already begun with a £22 billion boost to get our NHS back on its feet and tackle the waiting list. Great British Energy turbocharging the drive for clean energy. Investment in our buses and putting railways back on the path to public ownership. And new rights and protections for renters and bold action to deliver safe and affordable housing. Free breakfast clubs launched. A new generation of teachers being recruited to create opportunity for the next generation. A £12 an hour minimum wage. And our pro-worker, pro-business New Deal for working people. A New Deal that we put before Parliament within 100 days, that will raise living standards and security at work for over 10 million people. That is more action for working people in the last 5 months than the Tories managed in 14 years. And the incredible expansion planned here for Pinewood Studios mirrors the growth we want to unleash around the country. Raising living standards to heal economic and social hardship, transforming our transport system, fixing our broken housing market and delivering for safe, affordable, decent homes and the infrastructure that we desperately need. Partnering with local leaders, business and civil society to ignite good growth in our towns and cities. Labour isn't afraid to be bold, and that is what this country needs. We will deliver the most ambitious but achievable programme for a government in a generation. To create a fairer Britain, where families have more money in their pockets, fair pay for a fair day's work, good jobs and opportunity to thrive, where no one is written off or left behind, a Labour government with working people at its heart. That's our plan for change, and we're united behind it. And above all, it's a plan that shows we've listened to you and that we will continue to listen. And on that note, before I finish, I'd like to invite you to listen to Bliss. Like so many others, Bliss delivers the change we want to see every day, keeping people warm in their homes with renewable energy. Thank you for being here today, and over to you, Bliss.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Bliss Cunning, and I absolutely love my job. I'm a plumber, officially known as a low-carbon heating support engineer, installing heat pumps for Octopus Energy. Every day, I get to help regular people enjoy the benefits of cheap, renewable energy in their homes while contributing to the UK's goal of net zero. I take pride in my work, and as someone worried about our climate, I feel really good about the change I'm helping to deliver. But it's been a journey to get here. When I left school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I signed up to uni because that felt like the traditional route to a job, but I didn't enjoy it and couldn't see a career after study. I cut it short and decided to do what makes me happy. Becoming a plumber wasn't easy at the start. It's hard to get work if you haven't been an apprentice, and some companies don't create the opportunities for those starting out that Octopus has. But the rewards on the other side have been worth it. A couple of weeks ago, I did an install for a retired couple. It wasn't an easy job, and a bit of problem solving was required. Each day they cooked us a different lunch, which was so generous. And on the last day, I bought them flowers to say thank you. And that's what gets me out of bed each morning, is helping people. You hear a lot of stories about heat pumps, but most of them are not true. For me, it's not a competition with gas. It's just what saves on bills and what saves the planet. I'm already seeing people's attitudes changing. In just the space of a year, people are much more supportive. So, Prime Minister, my message today is to keep going with the clean energy mission. There are so many more heat pumps we can be installing, and they make such a difference to reducing our emissions. So thank you for making this agenda happen. Thanks for supporting clean technology, and thank you for supporting jobs like mine. I know we're making a real difference, and this is why I'm delighted to introduce today the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Ange, and thank you to all of our speakers, speaking so powerfully about things that really, really matter. And Bliss, that was incredible. And Bliss has never spoken in public like this, from a stage like this before in her life. I saw her about half an hour, 45 minutes ago, a little apprehensive, but you absolutely nailed it there, Bliss. Well done, and what an amazing contribution. An amazing contribution you're already making to our country, so thank you for that. And as Ange said, it is really great to be here at the iconic Pinewood Studios, the spiritual home of Britain's film industry. And, you know, the leader of the opposition thinks that if you do a couple of shifts in McDonald's, then you can become working class. So by that logic, if I keep coming back here, I could be the next James Bond. But this really is an incredible place. I'm sure you felt it when you came in. Countless Oscars produced here. An engine of growth which supports 8,000 jobs. And more than that, a beacon to the world of British creative brilliance. So I'm delighted to be here to launch our plan for change. Because this is about who we are as a nation, How do we project our values, fight for our values, show our strength in an ever more volatile world? But also to show to the British people that their country can still do great things. And to be honest, not just great things, things that they should be able to take for granted, the basic functions of the state. Take the NHS mentioned earlier, because perhaps more than any other institution, it represents the bigger us. Millions owe everything to it, and 2 of them are here. My family, of course, no difference. And I know I've said this before, but I would not be here without the NHS. It's the reason my mum was able to have children when she was first told, aged 11, that that would never happen. And that's because the NHS never gave up on her. And behind every single door in this country, there's a family with their own version of these stories. And yet here we are. The NHS, even the NHS, losing the trust of the British public, record dissatisfaction, unable to provide the timely care and dignity that Britain relies on, a precious contract between the state and the people, broken by public services in crisis, unable to perform their basic functions, broken by an economy that leaves millions working harder just to stand still, and broken by politicians who promised change and never delivered. Broken, but not beyond repair. Because one thing the British people do know in their bones is that this is a great nation. No matter how tough things are for their family and their community, they know that. And they're right. Because they recognise it in themselves. After all, in the last 14 years, they tightened their belts when they were told, we're all in it together. They closed ranks to defeat a deadly virus. And they never once wavered in their commitment to stand with Ukraine. And all they asked for in return was a government to meet them halfway. And there's hope in that. The hope of a government finally able to match their ambition with a credible plan for unlocking their potential. A great nation, rediscovering it can do great things, renewing that contract with the people, delivering the change that they voted for. But that's the catch, isn't it? The purpose of this government is to make our public services and our economy work for working people, strengthen our country in a world that increasingly preys on weakness. It's a cause that demands nothing less than the full power of government. Yet that's precisely what's broken, isn't it? As I've said a number of times, fixing the foundations is like finding damp in your wall. You can paint over it and get the hairdryer out and dry it. All done that. Hope it goes away. Or you can strip it out, rip out the plaster, and deal with the problem once and for all. But unless we fundamentally reform the way government goes about its business, unless we first change how we try to change the country, then the hairdryer is all we've got. And this is a big job. Prisons overflowing, the NHS on its knees, a £22 billion black hole in our public finances, which, to put that in context, is nearly half of what we spend on defence of our country. Now, I don't want to use that as an excuse. I expect to be judged on my ability to deal with it. And the work of change has begun. £25 billion invested in the NHS. Asylum returns up 53%. The minimum wage raised by a record amount. Stabilising the economy, fixing the foundations, clearing up the mess so we can take the country forward with our missions. Now, that doesn't happen by accident. There's no investment in our public services without difficult decisions. No solution to the housing crisis without approving controversial development. And no taking our country forward without levelling with you honestly about the trade-offs we must face together. No, the path of change is long, it's hard, there are a few thanks in the short term. But mark my words, with this plan for change, we will stick to it, country first, party second. So in that country first spirit, we change our plan, a plan for change, a plan that does two things at the same time. First, it doubles down on our national missions, a strategy that, for all the turbulence of the world around us, has remained robust since we published it nearly 2 years ago. A strategy that will give the government and the nation, whether in calm or choppy waters, the stabilising certainty of the clear destination, guide us towards a decade of national renewal. Yes, some will say, we've heard these missions before. Where's the rabbit out the hat? In Westminster, they always say that. But I make no apologies for sticking to our plan, and no apologies for fixing the eyes of Whitehall, not on the distraction of Westminster, but on the long-term good of our country. However, to drive those missions forward in this Parliament and show our progress towards them, today we publish new milestones, measurable milestones, that will also give the British people the power to hold our feet to the fire. Because that accountability, that is part of how we shift the focus in Westminster towards long-term change. Second, our plan commits Whitehall to mission-led government, an approach to governing that won't just deliver change, but also itself, fix the foundations and make no mistake, plan will land on desks across Whitehall with the heavy thud of a gauntlet being thrown down. A demand, given the urgency of our times, for a state that is more dynamic, more decisive, more innovative, less hostile to devolution and letting things go. On the deployment of technology, harnessing its power to rethink services, rather than replicate the status quo in digital form. Artificial intelligence is particularly crucial here, an unprecedented opportunity for this country. We are strong already, and we must become stronger still. And we must also tear down the walls of Whitehall, let the nation in, a state that builds its capacity through partnership, rather than viewing itself as the only source of expertise. Because ultimately, mission-led government is a plan for the nation, a partnership. Businesses, charities, campaigners, unions, investors, England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, the people of these islands, all pulling in the same direction, all focused on taking our country forward. Because at the end of the day, we all have a stake in change. We all look forward and see the same horizon. We all feel the burden of where we are as a country. The contract which must be repaired is ours. And that requires change. So this is our plan. It begins, as we set out in our manifesto, with strong foundations. Economic stability, national security, border security. Those fundamentals never change, and we will never risk them. That's the argument we made and continue to make about the values of a changed Labour Party, serving the real concerns of working people, not changing the conversation, not walking away or talking down to them. And that's not just about immigration, but as ever, that shows the argument. Take these statistics that were published last week, which revealed with total clarity how the Tories lost control of immigration, opened the borders deliberately to cover up the extent of their economic stagnation. Zero regard for the damage to trust in politics. Absolutely unforgivable. Now, this government will reduce immigration, legal and illegal, because that is what working people want. And not just on migration itself, also the way that they want the economy to grow for them. That is absolutely the change that we promised at the election. And we're not hanging around. We're clearing the asylum backlog, processing thousands more claims than when we came to office, returns of foreign national offenders up 29%, on track for the highest overall number of returns for 6 years. That is what dealing with the problem seriously looks like. A much more meaningful deterrent than spraying taxpayers' money up the wall or the ridiculous Rwanda gimmick. And then, on those strong foundations, we rebuild Britain with our national missions, driven forward in the harsh light of accountability by the milestones for this Parliament. 1, higher living standards in every region of the country as we target the highest sustained growth in the G7. So working people have more money in their pocket. The burden of the cost of living crisis no longer intruding on the joy of their family life. 2, Britain rebuilt with 1.5 million new homes. So the security I enjoyed when I was growing up, the base camp aspiration of home ownership, doesn't move further and further away from working class families like mine. 3, safer streets, more police on the beat, stamping out antisocial behaviour in every community. Because nobody should feel insecure in the streets that they call home. 4, the best start in life for every child, with a record proportion of 5-year-olds starting school ready to learn. Because it's a scandal, an affront to the British value of equal respect, if we do not give every child, whatever their background, a fair chance to succeed. 5, clean power by 2030, homegrown British energy, making our country more secure. So never again can a tyrant like Putin attack the living standards of working people. Waiting lists in our NHS cut. The 18-week target from referral to treatment finally met. A symbol of the NHS back on its feet, facing the future, dignity and care restored to millions. Now, some people, that's pretty brave. You've seen the books now. You know how hard that NHS milestone is. Building 1.5 million homes is ambitious, perhaps a little too ambitious. And look, I'll be honest, they're right. We face an almighty challenge to hit these milestones by the end of this Parliament. Like I say, we're starting from ground zero. Waiting lists over 7 million. Housing starts and permission the lowest for a decade. 1 in 3 children not ready for school at the age of 5. And that's kids in reception who aren't starting to read. They're struggling to speak. And, you know, in fact, given our inheritance, let's say on housing starts, clearly, if we don't turbocharge house building with reform, we won't meet that milestone. And if that level of candour surprises you, then honestly, it shouldn't. After all, what is the point of setting a target that you can deliver without bold action? That's not public service. That's political cynicism. No, the job of these milestones is to take our country forward, drive reform through the public sector. It's not about making the government look good. So yes, they are risky for us. Country first, party second. Because that is something we've totally lost sight of in British politics. And to be honest, across Whitehall as well. I don't think there's a swamp to be drained here. But I do think that too many people in Whitehall are comfortable in the tepid bath of managed decline, have forgotten, to paraphrase JFK, that you choose change not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Now, I totally get that when trust in politics is so low, we must be careful about the promises we make. But across Whitehall and Westminster, that's been internalised as a don't say anything, don't try anything too ambitious, set targets that will happen anyway, like Rishi Sunak's inflation target, for example. And then they wonder why working people won't give you a pat on the back, wonder why working people no longer believe that politics can make a real difference to their lives. Our plan for change is a break, both with the unrealistic bluster of Boris Johnson, but also with the acceptance of decline that was Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges. Our plan for change is the most ambitious and credible programme for government in a generation, and we embrace the risk that comes with it. Because if there was no jeopardy, if there was no resistance, no blockages or impediments for us to remove, then as sure as night follows day, that will be a sign that we're not serious about delivering change. And I will never do that. The mandate was for change, and change is what we will deliver. So to those who still need to hear it, change and reform are coming. That's what this plan means. Productivity in the public sector is 2.6% lower than this time last year, 8.5% down compared with just before the pandemic. Now, that would not be accepted in any other sector or walk of life. And I'm not going to subsidise it with ever-rising taxes on the British people. Take our neighbourhood policing guarantee as an example. That will deliver 13,000 extra neighbourhood police, visible on the beat, cracking down on antisocial behaviour, a named contactable officer in every community, a relief for millions of people scared to walk their own streets. That pledge is only made possible because we're matching investment with reform, standardising procurement, streamlining specialist capabilities like digital forensics, ending the madness of each of our 43 forces purchasing their own cars and their own uniforms. Or take our planning system, a blockage in our economy that is so big it obscures an entire future, stops this country building roads, grid connections, laboratories, train lines, warehouses, wind farms, power stations, you name it. A chokehold on the growth our country needs, suffocating the aspiration of working families. I mean, you walk around our country, you look at our infrastructure, And it is clear almost immediately that we have long freeloaded off the British genius of the past because we won't build a future. We haven't built a reservoir for over 30 years. And even the projects we do approve are fought tooth and nail and tooth until you end up with the absurd spectacle of a £100 million bat tunnel holding up the country's single biggest infrastructure project, driving up taxes and the cost of living beyond belief. And I tell you now, this government will not accept this nonsense anymore. We will streamline the approval process in the forthcoming planning and infrastructure bill. And driving through reform, I can announce another new target. Not just 1.5 million homes, but also 150 major infrastructure projects. A milestone that will triple the number of decisions on national infrastructure compared with the last Parliament. And just as importantly, will send a very clear message to the NIMBYs, the regulators, the blockers, the bureaucrats, the alliance of naysayers, the people who say, no, Britain can't do this. We can't get things done in our country. Well, we say to them, you no longer have the upper hand. Britain says yes. Because whether you like it or not, we are building a future for working people, making our country strong with stability, investment and reform. And we're building it with urgency because there's no time to lose. Everyone can see there's a growing impatience with traditional politics. Everyone can see how people are tired with those who fail to get the job done. Now, populism isn't the answer to Britain's challenges. Easy answers won't make our country strong. But nobody can deny that this kind of politics feeds off real concerns. In fact, that's the crux of the matter. People haven't become radical ideologues. We are still, in our values, a pragmatic nation. What people want from their politics, that hasn't changed. They want a stable economy. They want their country to be safe, their borders secure, more cash in their pockets, safer streets in their town, opportunities for their children, secure British energy in their home, and an NHS that is fit for the future. And that is why we've set these missions. Missions to make our country strong. Missions to make working people better off. Missions this government will deliver. And I don't think these are unreasonable hopes. Clearly not. But nor do I underestimate how little faith there is from working people most of all, that politics can still deliver for them. And that's not unreasonable either. Because they kept to the contract, worked tirelessly for their family and their community, but the previous government never kept their side of the bargain. And that is what we must change. That is what these missions add up to. I don't want to give you the whole story about my parents all over again. But no matter how tough life was growing up, they always believed that if they worked hard, Britain would be better for their children. You can call that hope. You can call it security. You can call it aspiration. In the end, it amounts to the same thing. It's a feeling, a belief, a confidence that allowed working class families like mine to raise their eyes, to look forward and build their lives around the future. People can call that sentimental if you like, but I am convinced that if we unlock that potential, there is so much power in this country. I'm convinced that if we get these missions right, we can make our country stronger. I'm convinced that if we can show that politics can change Britain for the better, then we can face the future with confidence. A country secure in its values, determined to walk through the storm and build a new Britain with 1.5 million new homes, neighbourhood policing in every community, children starting school ready to learn, a more secure energy system, living standards raised, people better off, more cash in their pocket, more freedom to enjoy their family life, and dramatically cut waiting lists. That is my plan for change, the driving purpose of this government, and we will stay the course. We will fix the foundations, repair the damage, reform government, and rebuild Britain through the power of change. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm now going to take a number of questions from the media. I'm starting with Chris Mason from the BBC. Chris.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Chris Mason at BBC News. You've set out these milestones this morning. Immigration isn't one of them, but you have talked about it and it is in the document. And so people might wonder whether it's a priority or not. Thank you.
There are basics in government. One of them is security and security of our borders. And they're foundational. And they must be delivered. So immigration and control of immigration must be delivered. That is a foundational principle that any government must do. The missions then sit on top of that. They're the change that the government will then bring about. And so these are absolutely integral to our plan. They're the foundational stone of the plan, and they will be delivered. We'll bring in immigration down, both legal and illegal. But I take that as the basic security that any government must deliver, and we build the 5 missions, the plan for change on that. Thank you, Chris. Can I come to Beth, please?
Thank you.
Beth Rigby.
Sorry. Yeah, I've got stuck. I got stuck. I'm up. Prime Minister Beth Rigby, Sky News. I want to follow up on Chris's question because I'm a bit confused. You say migration in this country under the Tories is unforgivable. You said borders are one of your top 2 priorities. You put tackling small boats into your mission promises before the election, adding it to your 5 missions. And yet on the banners behind you, there's nothing there. In the 6 milestones of measurement, there's nothing there. So you have not given the public one metric on which to measure you when it comes to migration. Is that because you fear failure, or is it because you said it was a priority to win, but actually it's not even in your top 6? Thank you.
No, Beth. The way we've constructed it is that there are foundational things that a government must do, and they are based on security. So national security is obvious, but border security is equally obvious in my view. And that's why I've said we are committed to bringing down immigration, both legal and illegal. We must stop people crossing in boats across the Channel, and we have to get to grips with the volume of regular migration we have in this country. The statistics last week were shocking. Net migration of nearly 1 million, quadrupled in just 4 short years. It is the duty of government to bring that down. It is our duty to do it, and that's why I said it out in my speech, that that is what we would do, and we will do it. The missions are then the additional things that we want the government to do, the change that we want to bring about, and that's why we set them out in our manifesto. Each of the chapters in our manifesto was an example of how we would deliver that, and the plan for change then takes them forward with measurable milestones so that the public can see whether we're making the progress that we need to make in the missions. But the foundation is still the foundational stone on which this is built, which of course includes as an integral part border security. Thank you, Beth. Robert from ITV.
Robert Beston at ITV. Prime Minister, I don't know whether your colleagues mentioned this to you, but there's actually never been a parliament in modern times when real household disposable income didn't rise. I mean, it rose the lowest on record in the last parliament, and it's currently forecast by the Office for Budget Responsibility to rise the second lowest on record in this parliament, largely because you put up employers' national insurance. So what is your target for increasing real household disposable income, living standards? Because unless you put a numerical target on it, it's a meaningless milestone.
One of the worst failures of the last government was that living standards went down. People were actually worse off at the end of the government than they were at the beginning of the government. That's unforgivable. And that's what we want to turn around, to make sure people feel they're better off. There's one thing that came across in the election time and time again. If you ask people the questions on the doorsteps up and down the country, do you feel better off? There was only one answer given to that question, which was no. And that's what we intend to turn around. Stabilising the economy was an essential first step, because until you stabilise the economy, you can't build anything. On that, we then drive at living standards and drive them up. And people know when they're better off. It's one of the first things that people talk about. Of course, we'll go on. That's what the milestones are here. They all ladder up to our plan to make sure that living standards go up. But this is, I think, one of the most important people. Do people feel that they're better off? Do they feel safe? Do they feel they've got an NHS that's working for them? These are the fundamentals that I think everybody is most concerned about. Thank you very much, Robert. Chris Hope.
Chris Hope from GB News, Prime Minister. Again, sorry on secure borders. Your plan is to reduce net migration and reduce overall small boat crossings. GB News viewers will be saying simply, is that it, Prime Minister? Why can't you stop the boats and cut net migration to under 100,000? Is it because you can't or you don't want to? And just very quickly, can you afford all this with no more big tax rises?
Look, Chris, we are going to drive down migration, both legal and illegal. That will only be done with a serious plan. We had a gimmick for a number of years called Rwanda. What happened? The numbers went up. We wasted a lot of money, 700 removing 4 volumes to Rwanda. It didn't work. The only way to make it work is to smash the gangs that are running the vile trade, and that's why we've invested so much in setting up the command that is needed to do that, and with the enforcement action that follows through. And as you know, there was a very significant arrest just the other week in relation to the work that we are doing. That is how you do it. That is serious. That is a government that absolutely is getting to grips with this. Same on legal migration. You invite me to put an arbitrary number on it. For 14 years, we had an arbitrary number under the previous government. They said it was a hard cap. It wasn't hard, and it wasn't a cap. The net result of their deliberate policies was that migration went up 4 times, staggering those figures of last year. So we will not be following that approach. We're going to do this in a serious way to take migration down. And I think that's what the British public want, a serious plan to ensure we've got control of our borders, not arbitrary caps, not gimmicks, because if we've learned one thing from the last 14 years, it's that they have the opposite of the desired effect. Thank you very much, Chris. Gary from Channel 4.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. I'd like to follow on something that Robert Peston was asking about there, because you say people know if their income's gone up, but you're very specific in here. You're saying you want the measure used, annual average growth of household incomes. You want that measure to go up. It went up by 0.3%. Parliament, and it's projected by the OBR to go up by 0.5%. Do you, under in your government, do you give yourself a pass mark if it is 0.5%? Is that job done? And I've got to ask some of these other ones, which are slightly puzzling. On the NHS pledge milestone, sorry. What happens to all the other ones that you backed on the NHS in the general election, like, for instance, 4-hour waiting times for A&E. And can I also ask you, make a point in this document of talking about the 1.5 million homes in England?
Gary, it's one question.
Well, it's a long document. We've come a long way.
Yeah, but I mean, we're never going to have a lot of people to get through.
You change your language here on housing and you say it's hugely ambitious. Is that because you actually think the 1.5 million is a bit of a moonshot and you're not going to get there and you're preparing the ground for that?
Well, Gary, let me take all three parts of your question. Firstly, on living standards, look, nobody feels they're better off under the last government. And, you know, we just tested that on the 4th of July across the entire country. One of the main conversations on every doorstep was people saying they didn't feel better off. In fact, they felt worse off. That's what we are intending to change, and that's why we've made it one of the priorities under the plan. On the second point you make about the NHS, I want to hit this absolutely on the head, because I do not accept the proposition that because you drive to deal with waiting lists, then everything else must suffer. That is part of the thinking of the last 14 years. It's part of the reason you have managed decline, because you accept that and you accept other standards can go down. I don't accept that. And that's why we're going to drive this hard on delivery. That's why we're going to drive through reform at the same time. But the very idea that the moment you say, I'm prioritising one thing, that is permission to let go everything else, is completely wrong. It's part of the wrong thinking that we've had for years in politics, and I don't accept it for 1 minute, and it is not built into our assumptions. On the 1.5 million house, look, it is ambitious. It's huge. This hasn't been done for decades and decades. But we're going to do it. We're going to go for it. That's why we're going to take the difficult decisions. The reasons it hasn't been done is because people are too scared to take the planning decisions that were necessary. They talk the talk, but they didn't actually walk the walk. They didn't strip out the regulations that were needed, didn't get the skills in the right place. Yes, it's ambitious, and as I said candidly, it won't be met if we don't turbocharge this. But we can do this, and we're going to do this. It will be an incredible thing for so many people who need a secure roof over their head, somewhere of their own that they can own, and a massive driver of our economy. And again, I don't accept that by setting out clear priorities, somehow that's permission to either underachieve or not bother about other areas. That's part of the thinking that we intend to challenge and to change. Thank you very much, Gary. Natasha from LBC.
Prime Minister, thank you. Natasha Clark, LBC. First it was foundations, then it was missions, then it was steps, now it's milestones. Do you accept that this is quite a confusing plan for the public to understand what on earth your government is going to be all about? And obviously today you've told us that you're going to downgrade that growth aim from the highest of the G7. It's now just an aim. Clean power on 2030, it's now at least 95%. Are you watering down some of your promises after realising that government is a bit harder than you thought?
No, and the order in which you put things wasn't the order in which I announced them, because I announced the missions 2 years ago as our 5 national missions to give a sense of purpose-driven government. And, you know, like all of the strategies I've set down since I became Labour leader before 2019, after getting through the 29 election and then into the election of 2024, we've had a strategy, we've had a plan, and we've stuck to it. So those missions went down 2 years ago. We've stuck to them. I've just reiterated them now. We had them as our foundational documents in the manifesto. As I say, it was a chapter for each mission in the manifesto. So that's what we took to the country. That's the change that people voted for. We had 6 steps, the initial steps that we would do, which we indicated that we could do quickly after the elections. Things like setting up GB Energy, which we have done, and other things we've been able to achieve, putting the money in to drive and make sure we got those 40,000 extra appointments every week. We then passed the budget to make sure we could stabilise the economy, and now we set out the milestones so that people can measure, are we making proper progress on our missions, back to what we said 2 years ago, and what will it feel like for me? Will I have more money in my pocket? Will I be able to get an appointment at the NHS when I need it? So these are, if you like, something for the public to use to hold us to account on what we say we can achieve on the missions in the first 5 years. And I'll be absolutely straight about, it is also designed to push and drive the reform that we're going to need if we're going to ensure that we bring about the change that's so desperately needed. Thank you very much. I've got Eleanor from the Eye. Eleanor.
Hello, Prime Minister. Eleanor Langford from the Eye paper. Labour previously stated that it was going to achieve 100% clean energy by 2030, but this document today only puts that at 95. Is Labour rowing back on its clean energy pledges?
No, the clean energy pledge is today exactly what it was in the election. That has always been central to our mission. It's a bit like the 1.5 million homes. It's really difficult. And when we first set it out 2 years ago and started our conversations, almost everybody we spoke to said, that's tough. But then when we developed those conversations, people said it can be done, but it can only be done if it's turbocharged. So there's no watering down. There's a doubling down on the determination. Very much. Martin from the Express.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I'll have another stab at immigration. I'm still not sure what your actual plan is to tackle illegal crossings, which are up since you've become Prime Minister, the asylum bill, which is up since you became Prime Minister, and Brian Bell, Chair of the said at the weekend that we should expect a norm of net migration of around 350,000 per year. Do you agree with that?
Well, the only way to tackle illegal migration effectively is to take down the gangs that are running it. They're making a huge amount of money in order to put people on boats across the Channel, and we have to take them down. That's why we've set up the Border Security Command. That's why we're striking agreements with other countries. That's why I'm investing a lot of my time face-to-face with leaders to make sure that that law enforcement is the collaboration. I've done this before. I was chief prosecutor for 5 years. We had then, in my time, to deal with terrorist gangs who were also operating across borders. We had to deal with gangs that were moving drugs and guns across borders. And we did it by collaborating and coordinating. I've never accepted, and I won't accept, and I've said this before and I'll say it every day. Apparently we can deal with terrorist gangs. Apparently we can deal with gangs that are running guns and drugs, but apparently we can't deal with those people who are running this vile trade. I don't accept that. And I think that's the serious answer to this problem. Not a gimmick that made absolutely no difference and cost a fortune. And so that's how we have to take down the gangs that are running the trade in the first place. On the asylum costs, of course we've got to bring them down. We've got to process the claims. Because the last government didn't stop the boats and didn't process the claims. They've got record numbers of people who are stuck in the middle, having to be accommodated at the taxpayer's expense. That was a ridiculous way to run the country, and we're going to change that. Thank you very much. Can I have Anna from the FT?
Hi, Anna Gross from the Financial Times. When you select six targets like this, there's obviously going to be an opportunity cost for other policy areas that aren't being targeted. None of the six milestones that you've selected here seem like levers that will actually drive growth. There's nothing on skills, on training, on transport, on driving investment into the UK. Has the government given up on prioritising economic growth? And just a second part of that, you also previously said you'd have the highest growth in the G7 by the end of this Parliament. Is that still the ambition?
Firstly, let me push back on the suggestion that none of these have got anything to do with growth. They've all got everything to do about growth. If you can't get an operation and you can't get back to work, it has a massive impact on growth. Housing has a massive impact on growth. It's one of the biggest factors in determining growth, the house building projects across the country. Not just the projects themselves, but also the way in which it allows people to live where they need to live for the jobs that they're going to have. So these are all deliberately there, laddering up to growth, which is the number one mission of this government. So each in their own way contributes to that. Clean power is another example. If you ask businesses, what's the thing that's really caused you the most problem over the last 3 years? Almost all of them will say very high energy bills. And so they are all there. They actually all ladder up to growth. On your second challenge that on the higher sustainable growth in the G7, that is what I set out 2 years ago. That's what I'm doubling down on today. But what we're putting in place is a milestone so people can sense, can know and measure and hold us to account as to how we're doing on that. Because growth is fundamentally important. It remains the mission. We double down on it. But growth in the abstract doesn't feel the same or doesn't mean the same thing as people feeling they're better off. And therefore, I want to make sure that people understand, what do we mean when we say the highest sustainable growth in the G7? We mean you're going to feel better off. And so it's a milestone towards that mission which remains in place. Thank you very much, Anna. Ben from The Telegraph.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Ben Riley-Smith from The Telegraph. Can I go back to that clean energy pledge? You seem to be suggesting nothing's changed, but I've got your manifesto here. It says zero carbon electricity. That's 100% clean. Today you're saying 95% clean. So are you really arguing that voters, when they read zero carbon, should have read 5% carbon?
Well, Ben, the mission hasn't changed from the day I launched it nearly 2 years ago in terms of where we need to get to on clean energy by 2030. It's exactly the same as it always was. There's always going to be a mix, but that is the pledge that we made 2 years ago. That is the mission, and we've not changed it today. Thank you. Harry from The Sun.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Harry Cole from The Sun. When Rishi Sunak unveiled his 5 pledges, you mentioned them earlier, you accused him, and I quote, of failing to tackle the big pressures the country face by picking easy targets, achievable goals. But haven't you just done exactly the same thing? This is low-hanging fruit, isn't it? There's no migration, no living standards, totally woolly targets on NHS reform. And to quote you again, where's the thud on Whitehall's desk about the 11 million working-age people who are not in work? How can that not be a mission? And while I've got you, what's your response to the poll this morning that says half of voters, including lots of people who voted for you in July, think you're doing a bad job?
Well, look, Harry, on the ambition here, 1.5 million homes is to do, if we build that, is to do something that hasn't been done for decades. That's really bold. It's not lacking ambition. That's not easy. It won't happen, by the way, if we don't make the change that we've spelt out. It will not happen. That's what I spelt out directly in my speech. That's how hard it is. Waiting list down to target by the end of this Parliament when there's 7 million. That's never been done before. That's hardly unambitious. That's hardly the warm bath that Rishi Sunak got into. Clean power by 2030. I can tell you, Harry, when I announced that 2 years ago, the first response of almost everybody is, that's not achievable. You're never going to do it. They didn't say, oh, that's a breeze. I don't accept that they are not ambitious. I accept they're actually really risky for us to put them up there, because that is now the measurable that we've chosen to put before the public. And look, Harry, on polls or anything else, I know what I was elected to do, which was to change the country for millions of people who desperately need change. I knew we had to do the hard yards early on, take the tough decisions early on. Anybody who's ever run a business or an organisation knows if you're going to change things, you don't identify a tough decision and say, I'll do it in a couple of years' time. You do it straight away. I'll be measured when we get to the next election by whether I've delivered on what I'm saying I'll do for the British public, and that is the plan that we've set out today, the measurables that we have chosen to put out there to be measured against. And I've chosen them because I'm convinced they're the change that the country needs and people need to feel. So thank you, Harry. Aubrey at The Times.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Aubrey Alagrassi from The Times. You talk about the needs to be honest about, isn't it the case that the government quite narrowly on these targets, you will neglect and deprioritise other things? That could include accident and emergency, GP appointments, immigration, and violence against women and girls. So can you be honest about the trade-offs that you're making here? And to follow up on the question about the Clean Energy Pledge, you say that it's exactly what was in the manifesto, but we've reread it. Doesn't appear there. So can you explain to people why it can't be 100% by 2030?
Yeah, look, in terms of the trade-offs, I'd say two things. Firstly, I think everybody would accept that a government needs priorities. And the reason a government needs priorities, because without priorities, you don't get anything delivered. You just have a scattergun, and you don't have the focus that you need. So we have to have priorities. Now, it is inevitable that as soon as you put priorities up there, somebody will say, oh, but why didn't you include this? Why didn't you include that? And you end up back where you started, which is without priorities at all. So you have to have priorities to drive delivery. Every business knows that. Every organisation knows that. Anyone who's ever done anything in their lives knows that you need to have priorities if you're going to get things done. If you just have a generalist scattergun approach, it's the surest way of ensuring that you're not actually going to deliver anything. I do not accept that by putting priorities up there that we're giving permission on everything else to fail. I don't accept that. I won't accept that. That is not acceptable, and it's not the way we'll do government. But this is setting out measurables for people so that they can see how we're making progress on our missions and hold us to account for those missions and to drive delivery and drive the change that we need in order to do so. In relation to the Clean Power mission, as I say, we launched this 2 years ago. The ambition, the nature, what we've said about it has been completely consistent for 2 years. As I say, the reaction at the time is it's not possible, something I didn't accept then and I don't accept now. I've got Sophie from the Daily Mirror.
Sophie Huskisson from the Daily Mirror. Prime Minister, Scotland has vowed to axe the two-child benefit limit. Will you now reconsider your decision not to scrap it, to hit your milestones to give children the best start in life and to improve living standards?
Well, Sophie, what I can say is I'm absolutely committed to driving down and dealing with child poverty. That's what the last Labour government did to huge effect. It's why we've set up the task force to deal with this. But I don't accept that this is just one thing that needs to happen. If you're really going to tackle child poverty, you've got to look at housing, you've got to look at health, you've got to look at education, you've got to look at so many aspects of a child's life in order to take it seriously and to bring it down. So I know it's easy to think there's one silver bullet, and if you just do that one thing, that will change everything. I don't accept that, but we've got a strategy that we're working on to ensure that we do what the last Labour government did, which is to drive down child poverty. Thank you very much. I've got Harriet from the Daily Mail.
Thanks, Prime Minister. Harriet Line, Daily Mail. Since coming into office, you've launched 67 reviews, consultations and task forces, with even more in the pipeline. Critics say you're more interested in talking shops than tough decisions. Don't these reviews show that you simply didn't have a plan for what to do when you got into government?
No. And if you look at what we've done, there's a whole list of things that we've done already in government. I listed some of them in my conference speech in September. I haven't got time to repeat that speech here, but there were a long list of things that we've already delivered on, setting up Great British Energy, making sure that we're doing the already starting on the planning reform that we need, already using the money we've got to bring down the waiting lists in our hospitals. There's the Border Security Command already set up. So the delivery, there's lots and lots of stuff that's being delivered. But of course we've got to review things when we get into government. The first thing we had to do was review the books. I'm glad we did, although I didn't like what we found. We reviewed the books and found there was a £22 billion black hole. It's a good thing we did that review, because if we hadn't done that review, we wouldn't have been able to pass the budget, which is now stabilising the economy. We reviewed how many people we had in our prisons. Many more than we needed, bursting point, to a point where when I was trying to deal with the disorders, we were really struggling with whether we had enough prison places. That's unforgivable. I don't care which political party anyone supports. That is totally unforgivable. We're reviewing what's going on in immigration, because the numbers that came out last week were staggering. Of course we're going to review how we're going to deal with that, because everywhere you look, the failure of the last government was much more profound and deep than even everybody thought it was on the 4th of July. So like any business or organisation, as I say, you've got to understand what you're dealing with once you're in a position to deal with it. And that's why we are looking across the board, looking at what we've got to do, and already getting on with the change that we need. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you for being here.
proceed. On some of the Noble Lord's specific questions on financing and support, I will write to him with detail. In cases that are not able to proceed as an inquest, the government will also ensure that the Independent Commission is able to hold public hearings, take sworn evidence from individuals, and allow families to have effective representation. Although the courts found the Commission to be sufficiently independent to conduct Article 2 compliant investigations, as the Noble Lord highlighted, we will make further changes to its powers and accountability to strengthen the Commission's independence in order to secure the confidence of the public and the families. As the Secretary of State said yesterday, this work will consider provisions included in the draft Stormont House Agreement legislation and learn from Operation Canova, which, my Lord, sets out a framework for disclosure without immunity, which is why we will work so closely, and that is in answer to one of the questions from the Noble Lord. These steps taken together will ensure compliance with the ECHR, remove conditional immunity, ensure the reinstatement of legacy inquests halted by the Act, restore civil claims and reform ICRA. Importantly, this will be done while ICRA continues working on behalf of the growing number of families who have already sought its help. My Lord, the Secretary of State has made clear the value he placed in engagement, and this government will carry out an additional time-limited process of engagement on measures to be included in primary legislation in answer to the Noble Baroness. That includes ongoing engagement with members of your Lordship's House, and I want to thank all Noble Lords for how generous they have been with their time to date. Engagement will include families, victims groups and veterans, and of course the Irish Government. My Lords, I would emphasise that engagement with veterans will recognise the dedicated service of the vast majority of police officers, members of the armed forces and the security services who did so much to keep people in Northern Ireland safe during the Troubles. It is clear that the full participation of both the UK and Irish governments in all legacy mechanisms is important if we are to provide as much information as possible for as many families as possible, and that is what we seek to do. In line with the Secretary of State statement, we have sought to leave to appeal elements of the judgment in Dillon and others in the Northern Ireland Court of Appeal. This will address wider concerns and their potential impact far beyond Northern Ireland. As set out in the statement, though, this will not slow down our efforts to seek agreement and bring forward legacy legislation, so that ICRA, which has begun its work, can demonstrate its capacity to assist victims and their families, helping them and society in Northern Ireland to take the next steps in the healing process. I'd like to assure Noble Lords in terms of our support for veterans. The some members of your Lordship's House know that I am an honorary captain in the Royal Navy. I consider myself, if not a member of our military family, at least on the periphery of our military family. And this is a matter very close to my heart, as well as many in this House. I want to thank the 250,000 people who served during the Troubles to keep us safe. And my Lords, our government will work closely with veterans and veterans groups to ensure that the right pastoral care and welfare support is in place and the right legal support as and when required. With regard to other points raised, I want to reassure the Noble Lady Baroness Sashi about our constant and regular engagement with the government of Ireland, the new government of the Republic of Ireland. And the Secretary of State met with Michael Martin earlier this week and is meeting again to discuss legacy issues again this week. Regular engagement has started and will continue. In terms of the process for consultation on the revised ICRA, I outlined how that will be, but it will be with every member of this House if they wish to engage with me. We want to take as many soundings as possible to make sure that people have confidence and faith in what comes next. I think I've answered the majority of questions, but I will reflect on Hansard and come back to Noble Lords. In conclusion, I look forward to working with Noble Lords from across the House as we bring forward the government's next step on dealing with some incredibly complex but crucially important issues.
My Lord, can I welcome the Noble Baroness's explanations in answer to the questions, which I think are very helpful, as well as the original statement. And can I also welcome the restoration of inquests and civil actions as routes to truth and justice for victims and survivors, because they should never have been abolished in the first place. does the Secretary of State agree that the, closed in the first place. Does the Secretary of State agree, or does the noble Minister agree, my noble friend the Minister agree, that the ICRIR needs significant reform to win trust? It doesn't have that trust amongst victims and survivors at the moment, and it must gain it. There's a real fear that it will focus on what you might call a light touch reviews, rather than proper Operation Canova investigations, truth recovery investigations, and I accept that they should not undermine the security services, of course, but they should, and nor did he. The Operation Canova didn't do that. It had the confidence of victims and survivors. The new process needs genuinely unfettered access to information unencumbered by the test of reasonableness. And can I finally say that, as she explains, as the Secretary of State completes the repeal and replace commitment made by the government, specifically, how will they do that specifically in the interests of victims and survivors? Because that's got to be paramount.
My Lords, I want to put on record, I want to thank my noble friend and put on record my personal thanks for the support he's given me since I took on these responsibilities, but also for the work that he has done for a long time in working with veterans groups and tackling and attempting to tackle some of the issues associated with legacy. I thoroughly agree with him that Operation Canova actually could provide a template for going forward, and the Secretary of State is committed to looking at how that worked. While protecting national security, it does provide a potential way forward. With regards to the reform of ICRA, right now our intention is to reform ICRA to build confidence. That is at the heart of everything that we will seek to do with the primary legislation, and we can only do that with ongoing engagement. My Lords, the reality is that the victims of the Troubles are still in pain. We saw some of that in the other house yesterday. The heartbreak is real and tangible, and it is not for me to decide what will work in this area to give them confidence. It's not candidly for many of us to determine what happens next. We need to talk to them and engage with them to make sure they have confidence in processes that they will be working with every day so that they can get a level of peace. It is to them that we are doing this work.
I thank the noble Lord the Minister and the Secretary of State for the statement today, and I welcome very much the reinstatement of civil proceedings, the removal of immunity, and the commitment to restore inquests. And I look forward to ongoing engagement on these issues. My Lords, I have to declare my interest as a member of the International Steering Group of Operation Canova, which has been repeatedly referenced today. Is the noble Baroness the Minister aware that the Court's findings on the Northern Ireland Troubles Act derive from the very limited number of cases which Mr Justice Colton agreed to accept for judicial review? There were in fact 20 applications for judicial review, and the majority of them were turned down. The consequence of that, I'm sure the noble Baroness the Minister is aware, is that many issues were not adjudicated on, and that the appeals to the High Court were only able to adjudicate upon matters. Appeal to the Court of Appeal could only adjudicate on matters in the High Court. So there were very limited outcomes from that process. Can the noble Lord the Minister provide further clarity about what really is meant by repeal and replacement of the Act, the exceptional powers granted to the Secretary of State, and the ongoing situation in which the Secretary of State's decision-making will be inevitably informed by the services, the intelligence services? It creates a massive problem of trust. Is the noble Baroness aware of the difficulties experienced by Canova and the inappropriate classification of material as secret and not to be disclosed to families, which has occurred as a repeated feature in Northern Ireland? And can the noble Baroness the Minister ensure that restrictions on access to information are removed and that the assurances of support to veterans will apply equally to victims?
Can I thank the noble lady both for her constructive engagement on this issue, but also for how generous she has truly been with her time with both me and the Secretary of State, and I look forward to working with her in the months ahead as we develop next steps. Her voice will be incredibly important. With regards to the specifics, of course, I'm aware of the detail of the current legal cases and why some issues were raised and others weren't. I think that the bringing forward of primary legislation means we get to look at some of the other issues in the round, and I look forward to doing that as we bring forward that process. And in terms of and that will also relate to disclosure and national security, and we will have those conversations, because for some that will be at the crux. But to reassure the noble lady, there is nothing that we are doing that I hope that we will take. We seek to do nothing to the people of Northern Ireland on the issue of legacy. We want to do this with the people of Northern Ireland, to deliver for them and for victims. And that is the approach that this government will be taking as we develop the primary legislation.
Can I welcome what the Noble Baroness, the Minister, has said about the decision to appeal on the disclosure of sensitive information, and also to appeal in relation to the question on Article 2 of the Windsor Framework. The Minister said in the other place about seeking clarification of the legal position. But can she go further and say that if this does not turn out as the government expects, that they will actually legislate to put matters right on both of those issues in the unfortunate circumstances where the courts may rule against the government? And on the issue of primary legislation, will she ensure that, and I welcome her commitment to talk to victims and victims groups, and her commitment to this issue, and to talking to colleagues here in this House, will she ensure that there is proper redress for the innocent victims of the IRA, that it's not a one-sided process, that Sinn Féin, the First Minister of Northern Ireland, so-called Minister for All, who continues to eulogise and support murder of IRA against innocent victims, that will be called out as well, and that the Irish Republic's position has been outlined by the Noble Lord on the benches opposite, that will also be brought into the discussions. And finally, she has mentioned about having consultations with the Irish Government. Will she commit once again to to undertake to follow the three-stranded approach, which is that the Government of the Irish Republic should only be consulted on matters that are outside the remit of Northern Ireland and only in matters that affects them?
Can I thank the Noble Lord for his questions and for his ongoing engagement and support that he has given me in recent months as I have tried to get to grips with some of these issues. With regard to the Windsor Framework Article 2 appeal, he'll know full well I can't speculate on what we would or would not do post any judgment and what that judgment would be likely to do, but as and when, or if and when that is the case, I will revert back to your Lordship's house, I am sure. With regard to the victims of the Troubles and the perpetrators of some of the most vicious terror attacks our country has ever known, there is no hierarchy, and there is no hierarchy of victim nor of persecutor. Those people who perpetuated these acts should be held to the same account, regardless of which section of the community they come from. And we will do everything that we can to make sure that every group that has a level of responsibility for next steps forward as we work towards rebuilding, and as we work towards a genuine legacy process that works for the people of Northern Ireland, that all partners take full responsibility and fulfil all of their commitments that they have made under a series of pieces of legislation. And that includes the Government of the Republic of Ireland.
My Lords, I welcome the statement on legacy from my noble friend, and particularly in relation to the removal of the immunity scheme, the reinstatement of civil and the restoration of halted legacy cases. Undoubtedly, my Lords, challenges do remain, and can my noble friend confirm that she will continue to work through the remedial order, the repeal legislation and the reform of ICRA already referred to ensure that confidence in the rule of law, policing, reconciliation and support for victims and survivors will be the prime objectives to achieve that shared society that we earnestly desire in Northern Ireland and the transformational change that is required in legacy.
Can I thank my noble friend for her support and for the question? We are clear that the remedial order that was tabled yesterday is a first step on delivering what was our manifesto commitment, but was more importantly our promises to the people of Northern Ireland in terms of delivering a pathway through on legacy related to the Troubles. Our next step will be to reform ICRA to build confidence, and that will require ongoing engagement with everyone in your Lordship's House. My Lords, last month I was in Northern Ireland and I met a youth group who were aged 18 to 25. They were exploring the Good Friday Agreement. For them it was history. Experience of every day in Northern Ireland that they contend with. I am delighted and so privileged that so many people in your Lordship's House worked together to deliver a society where the Troubles for them was history. But we now need to make sure that we are working with the families that were touched by the Troubles, so that the next generation isn't affected by intergenerational trauma and has answers about what happened to their families.
Look, my Lords, the whole House would be in the debt of the noble Baroness Lady Anderson for the way in which she has repeated the statement to your Lordship's House today, and she's palpably and demonstrably personally invested in this process, and I think everyone owes a debt of thanks to her. She will know that the primary responsibility for oversight of remedial orders falls to the Joint Committee on Human Rights, and at its meeting yesterday it decided it would look at this remedial order urgently from a human rights perspective. It would help the committee if the noble Baroness could provide clarity on when she expects the Supreme Court to hear the Dillon appeal, and if she doesn't have that information, would she be good enough to try and establish that with them so that we have some idea of what the process will be and how long it would take. And given the impact on grieving families, which, as she says, was raised yesterday in a very moving way in another place, and inevitably the effect of justice delayed being justice denied, can we be assured that it's not just in due course, but the primary legislation will be in this session of Parliament? And, my Lords, 20 years later, with the government having to deal with outstanding matters like the McCurr group of ECHR judgments, will she undertake that they will be dealt with, again, in the primary legislation when it's brought forward? 20 years is a very long time to wait to resolve issues raised by the European Court.
I thank my noble Lord. I'll write to him on matters pertaining to the Dillon appeal on the Supreme Court. There are many things in my gift. That is not one of them in terms of timing. In terms of when the legislation will come forward, noble Lords will be aware of quite how busy the legislative agenda is right now in this House and forthcoming legislation. I want to assure noble Lords that we are working, we are making every effort, and in terms of timing that is not in my gift, but we will be bringing forward primary legislation as soon as parliamentary time allows, and I promise you appropriate representations are being made. And in terms of what will be included in the primary legislation, we want to make sure that it is genuinely effective and has confidence in the family. So, of course, we'll work to try and address as many issues as we can. And I look forward to engaging with the noble Lord on every specific case if he'd like to have those conversations.
My Lord, congratulate my noble friend on what is a significant achievement this is. It actually puts into practice what we said we would do before the general election, repeal the legislation. Some of the problems we faced with the current legislation was that every single political party in Northern Ireland disagreed with it. So can she assure me and your Lordship's House that there will be proper consultation with every single political party, with the First and the Deputy First Minister, yes, with the Irish Government where appropriate, to ensure that we've got the widest possible consensus on what's so very necessary? But many congratulations to her and to the Government on this.
Can I thank my noble friend both for his question but also for his generous mentoring of me since we came into government. I am in awe of the work he did when he was Secretary of State, and I'm very, very grateful for how generous he has been with his time. The noble Lord knows better than I quite how difficult and challenging it can be to secure consensus on matters pertaining to Northern Ireland. There is nothing more emotive than the issues that we are discussing. But we will have proper engagement with all political parties to try and build a way forward. We are very clear that one of the reasons why the current Legacy Act has failed to receive cross-community support and failed to secure the trust of communities in Northern Ireland and of the victims and survivors is because none of the political parties were in agreement. And while these conversations will be very, very challenging, I look forward to working with noble lords across this House to try and build a level of consensus, as the Secretary of State promised in the other place yesterday.
Lords, some things in life are very difficult to get a conclusion to. Some things are even difficult to get agreement on, and legacy in Northern Ireland is certainly one of them. And I think the noble Baroness will find, if she listened to Radio Ulster this morning, that while she has brought forward some new proposals, which I welcome and the Government have, they're just a little less undesirable than the ones that were there before. And that's not coming from this House, because I hear much more welcome from this House, Lordship's House, but if you listen to the radio this morning, it's much different. So what I'm going to say is that I am hugely frustrated, particularly in the sense of the Government just being in place when they announced an inquiry, a public inquiry, into the Pat Finucane murder, where we have hundreds and thousands of innocent victims in Northern Ireland without that opportunity. And I declare an interest in serving on the security forces in Northern Ireland for 18 years and seeing some of those people murdered, visiting their families and continuing to visit their families. And they're saying to me, for example, the victims of the Enniskillen bomb, where is the public inquiry? Where is the equality for me? And there isn't one. And until the noble Baroness and her Government get some equality into dealing with the legacy and the victims in Northern Ireland, there is never going to be agreement or support for that process. Thank you.
Can I take this opportunity to thank the noble lord for his service? And I can only imagine the things that he saw during that period of time when he served. And as a dedicated public servant, as with all colleagues in Northern Ireland, the support that they have provided to families who were touched by the Troubles, as many of them have been, that is a level of public service that very few of the rest of us have ever had to experience, and it puts them a class above, and we are grateful for everything that they did to support people. With regard to what was on the radio this morning, it will not surprise you, noble lords, that I may have been taking a particular interest in the media of Northern Ireland over the last, well, for a while, but definitely in the last 24 hours to see what the response. My lords, as was said, this is everything to do with legacy is so emotive, it becomes very, very challenging. And there is nothing more complex than the next steps in terms of, but our response is to make sure that we engage as broadly as possible with all members of the community. With regard to the Finucane public inquiry, my lords, that was a solemn commitment that was made by the last Labour government to deliver a public inquiry, and that is why we have fulfilled our commitment. It was something that we did in post the Good Friday Agreement, and that does not suggest that other arrangements cannot and will not provide a level of closure and information for noble lords, which is why we want to strengthen ICRA for the families.
My lords, much of what we have heard in the last hour or so has come to many of us as not a surprise. And I'm reminded of a phone message I received early this morning from Northern Ireland, from one of the families that I've been literally living with since they were faced with the tragedy of a murder in the Troubles. For my clergy, and I speak as the former Archbishop who led so many of the clergy during the Troubles, they have often heard good words, promising much, and never being able to deliver. And I speak from my heart. I didn't intend to contribute today, because we've heard it all before. But can I just put into words what many people listening to this debate in Northern Ireland would say, we have heard it all before. We have heard the promises. We've heard the good intentions. We do not doubt the morality of those who are saying these things, but we plead with those who have the political power to deliver. Now, at the 11th hour, please back up your words with actions. I'm still dealing with the children of those whom I buried. I'm still dealing with the children of families that will never be the same again. And I'm still in touch with those who have served in the forces of the Crown during the Troubles at great personal cost. And I can say and reassure the House, they are listening today yet again to wonderful words and promises. I beg you, back up your words with actions.
The noble Lord speaks much more eloquently than I ever could. There is very little I can say to him that you're right has not been said before by this dispatch box and in this building. All I can do is ask for his indulgence and that of the community while we try to find a way forward so that we can truly, finally, deliver a pathway through on truth and justice for those people affected by the Troubles, and give us a little more time so that we can deliver for them, with them, and not to them.
Questions on a statement made in the House of Commons on Tuesday the 3rd of December on new measures to tackle stalking.
My Lords, I thank the Noble Lord the Minister for bringing this statement to your Lordship's House. We welcome on this side the Government's announcement on stalking, and I'm sure that all Noble Lords will wish to do everything that we possibly can to tackle violence against women and girls. There have been many tributes to Nicola Thorpe for sharing her experiences, and I wish to echo those. It takes courage to speak up, and I cannot thank her enough for raising this situation. The previous Conservative government made real progress on this issue, and I can put it no better than the Shadow Minister in the House of Commons who said, "We launched our Tackling Violence Against Women and Girls strategy to increase support for victims. We elevated violence against women and girls to a crime type that police leaders must treat as a national threat. We ensured that victims can always access professional support. We doubled the maximum sentence for stalkers from 5 to 10 years, keeping behind bars for longer those who devastate their victims' lives. We also made stalking a specific offence to ensure that women and girls are protected and to show beyond doubt that stalking is a crime. My Lords, the number of people who have been stalked dropped by 0.5% from 2010 to 2024, according to the Office of National Statistics. So we, on this side of the House, very much welcome the Government's actions on stalking, and we want to work with them to eradicate this crime once and for all. And I wish to ask the Noble Lord perhaps just a couple of questions around this. Noble Lord the Minister, a couple of questions around this. So will the Noble Lord the Minister confirm in continuing the excellent work of the last government that there are conversations happening with relevant ministers in the Ministry of Justice and the Department for Housing, communities and local government to ensure that there is a truly cross-departmental focus on eradicating stalking? Also, has the Noble Lord the Minister had conversations with the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology officials to ensure that cyber-talking is clamped down on? What resources is the Noble Lord the Minister providing police forces with to ensure that this heinous crime is being tackled in all cases? But in closing, let me say that the Government can be assured that we, on this side of the House, will continue to fully support efforts to combat this abhorrent behaviour.
My Lords,
It's a very old declaration of interest, but I was a member of the Parliamentary Independent Stalking Inquiry led by Elfyn Llwyd MP, which published its results in 2012 and led to the first change of legislation that identified stalking as a separate criminal offence, as opposed to just gathering it in under harassment, which had happened before. And my lords, I was also a victim of sustained stalking before the days of online stalking over a 2.5-year period, and indeed my noble friend Lady Thornhill was also in receipt of some of the very unpleasant attentions of this person. The independent inquiry found that victims of stalking, whether domestic or not, had little confidence in the criminal justice system from the way police handled cases and indeed helped victims, and how the CPS frequently plea bargained with perpetrators, resulting in a distinct lack of justice for egregious cases of stalking. My lords, I wish I could say that this was history. It is not. Nothing has changed in the cultural way that the entire criminal justice system deals with stalking. The law may have changed, but far too many stalking victims are still told that they should welcome the attention. Far too many find that their cases are plea bargained away to harassment or some other minor offence. And as a result, that gives encouragement to the perpetrators. The reason that I mention this is that one of the things